Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for nearly 2 decades, and he thought he had developed the emotional resilience to handle virtually any situation that arose on stage. He had witnessed confessions that shocked audiences, heard testimonies of sacrifice that moved millions to tears, and listened to stories that had challenged everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the human capacity to carry unbearable secrets. But on that humid June afternoon in 2026, a 39-year-old woman named Jessica Monroe would make a confession so completely unexpected, so profoundly shocking in its revelation of a double life lived for 15 years, that Steve would signal for production to pause. Standing motionless with his hand raised, his face frozen in an expression of pure disbelief, while the entire audience sat in stunned silence trying to process what they had just heard and what it meant for the family standing on stage. 2 families stood ready to compete, the Hamilton family from Virginia and the Monroe family from Colorado. The Monroe family drew attention because there was a palpable tension emanating from them, particularly centered around Jessica Monroe, an attractive 39-year-old woman with shoulder-length auburn hair, intense green eyes, and a rigid posture that suggested someone steeling themselves for something difficult. She wore a simple navy blouse and black pants, stood without fidgeting, and had an expression of grim determination. Her family surrounded her with visible unease. Her husband David, who was in his early 40s and looked deeply anxious, her teenage son Tyler, who was 17, her daughter Madison, who was 14, and her younger son Connor, who was 11. All 3 children looked confused and worried, clearly sensing something was wrong but not understanding what. During the pre-interview, Jessica had been composed but visibly tense, answering questions in careful, measured sentences. When asked what had motivated her to be on the show, she had said something that immediately raised red flags. "I'm here because I need to tell my family something I should have told them years ago. Something that changes everything they think they know about me, about our family, about where we came from. My husband knows. I told him last month, but my children don't know. And I've decided that telling them publicly, in a setting where I can't back out, is the only way I'll actually go through with it. I've been living a lie for 15 years, and I can't do it anymore." Jessica's husband David, when asked about what Jessica planned to reveal, had spoken with obvious distress and resignation, saying, "My wife told me the truth 4 weeks ago, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about our marriage and our family. What she's planning to tell our children today will devastate them the way it devastated me. I've spent the last month trying to decide whether I can stay in this marriage, whether I can forgive what she did, whether our family can survive this. I don't have answers yet. But Jessica is determined to tell the kids, and she wanted to do it here, publicly, because she says she needs the pressure of witnesses to keep her from backing out. So here we are, about to destroy our children's sense of reality on national television." The Monroe family won their game with mechanical efficiency, Jessica contributing answers in a flat, emotionless voice. As they lined up for fast money, it was clear that Jessica had no intention of playing the game. She positioned herself at the podium before anyone could go first, and when Steve approached her to ask who would be playing, she cut him off and said, "Mr. Harvey, I'm not here to play fast money. I'm here to tell my children the truth about who I am, about where I came from, and about the lie I've been living for 15 years. I need to do this now before I lose my courage." Steve's expression shifted immediately to one of serious concern, and he said carefully, "Mom, are you sure you want to do this here? Some conversations are better had privately." But Jessica shook her head firmly and said, "If I try to have this conversation privately, I'll back out. I've been backing out of this conversation for 15 years. I need to do it now, publicly, with witnesses, so I can't run away from it anymore." Steve looked uncertain but finally nodded and said, "All right, tell us what you need to tell us." The studio fell into a tense, expectant silence. Jessica turned to face her children, and she took a deep breath before saying, "Tyler, Madison, Connor, I need to tell you something about me, about our family, that I should have told you a long time ago. The story you've grown up with, the story about who I am and where we came from, is not the complete truth. There are parts of my life, my past, that I've hidden from you because I was ashamed and afraid. Tyler, the 17-year-old, said with obvious anxiety, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Jessica's hands were trembling, but her voice remained steady as she said, "What I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see me, how you see our family, and how you understand your own identities. I need you to know that I love you more than anything in the world, and everything I've done has been to protect you and give you a normal life. But the cost of that protection has been living a lie, and I can't do it anymore." She paused, gathering herself, and then said, "My name is not Jessica Monroe. That's the name I've been using for the last 15 years, but it's not my real name. My birth name is Jennifer Kozlov. I was born in Russia in 1987. I came to the United States when I was 17 years old, in 2004, and I've been living under a false identity ever since." The gasps from the audience were immediate and loud, and Steve's mouth literally fell open in shock. Jessica's children looked completely confused, not yet understanding the full implications. Jessica continued, "I need to explain how this happened and why. I was born in Russia to a family involved in organized crime. My father was part of the Russian mafia, and by the time I was a teenager, I understood what that meant: violence, corruption, illegal activities. When I was 16, in 2003, something happened that put my life in danger. There was a conflict between rival criminal organizations, and my family was targeted. My father was killed, my mother disappeared, and I was in danger of being killed or worse." Jessica's voice grew stronger, driven by years of suppressed truth finally being spoken. She continued, "Someone, I won't say who because they could still be in danger, helped me escape Russia. They got me fake documents, a fake passport, a fake identity as a Jessica Monroe, an American citizen. I came to the United States in 2004 when I was 17, using those fake documents, and I've been living as Jessica Monroe ever since. I enrolled in high school here using my false identity. I went to college. I met your father. I got married. I had all three of you. I built an entire life, all of it based on fake documents and a false identity." Tyler said in a voice filled with confusion and growing horror, "Mom, are you saying you're not American? You're Russian? You've been lying about who you are our entire lives." Jessica nodded, tears now streaming down her face, and said, "Yes, Tyler. I'm not American. I'm Russian, living illegally in the United States under a false identity. Everything about Jessica Monroe is fake. My birth certificate, my social security number, my passport, all of it. Jennifer Kozlov is my real name, and she's wanted by the Russian authorities for questioning about her family's criminal activities, even though I had nothing to do with any of it." Madison, the 14-year-old, said, "Does that mean we're not really American? What does this mean for us?" David stepped forward and said, "The kids are American citizens. They were born here to someone they believed was an American mother. But their mother's identity, our marriage license, everything is based on false documents. We're in the process of figuring out the legal implications, but yes, this affects all of you." Steve finally found his voice and said, "Emmons Jessica, Miss Jennifer, are you telling us that you're confessing on national television to identity fraud, to living under a false identity for 15 years, to building an entire life including marriage and children, using fake documents?" Jessica nodded and said, "Yes, Mr. Harvey, I'm confessing to federal crimes on national television. I'm risking arrest, prosecution, deportation back to Russia where I could be in danger from the people who killed my father. I understand the risks, but I can't live this lie anymore. My children deserve to know who their mother really is, and I deserve to stop hiding." Steve raised his hand, signaling for production to stop, and he said firmly, "We need to pause. We need to stop everything right now and figure out what we're dealing with." The cameras stopped rolling, and for 30 minutes the studio was in controlled chaos. Producers conferring urgently with legal advisors, Jessica being counseled about the implications of what she had just said, her children in shock, David trying to comfort them while clearly struggling with his own emotions. When filming eventually resumed, the entire tone had changed. Steve said with great seriousness, "Ladies and gentlemen, we just heard something extraordinary and legally complex. Ms. Jennifer Kozlov, who has been living as Jessica Monroe for 15 years, just confessed that she has been living under a false identity since she was 17 years old that she came to the United States fleeing violence in Russia using fake documents, and that she's built an entire life, marriage, children, career, using that false identity. This confession has serious legal implications, and we want to be clear that what we're witnessing is not entertainment. It's a real person making an incredibly difficult choice to tell the truth after years of hiding. He turned to Jessica and said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you confessing to crimes that could get you arrested and deported?" Jessica looked at him and said, "Because, Mr. Harvey, I can't raise my children in a lie anymore. They're getting older. Tyler is 17, almost an adult. They're going to start asking questions about family history, about their grandparents, about our past, and I've been lying to them about all of it. I told them their grandparents, my parents, died before they were born, which is partially true but also a lie. I told them I grew up in Oregon, which is completely false. I've constructed an entire fictional childhood and family history to hide the truth about who I really am." She looked at her children and said, "Tyler, Madison, Connor, you deserve to know the truth about who your mother is. Yes, I'm Russian, not American. Yes, I've been living under a false identity. Yes, your grandparents on my side weren't ordinary people who died in a car accident like I told you. Your grandfather was involved in organized crime and was murdered, and I don't know what happened to your grandmother. I've hidden all of this because I wanted to protect you, wanted to give you a normal American life without the shadow of Russian mafia connections. But the cost of that protection has been living in constant fear of being discovered and lying to you about everything. I can't do it anymore." Connor, the 11-year-old, said in a small voice, "Are you going to go to jail, Mom? Are they going to send you back to Russia?" Jessica's face crumpled, and she said, "I don't know, baby. I might go to jail for identity fraud. I might be deported to Russia, which terrifies me because the people who killed my father might still be there. Or I might be offered some kind of legal resolution because I came here as a minor fleeing violence. I don't know what will happen. But I knew I couldn't keep lying to you, even if telling the truth destroys everything." Steve said, "Jennifer, your husband said he's been trying to decide whether he can stay in the marriage after learning this. Have you two made any decisions?" David spoke up and said, "I'm still processing this. Jessica, Jennifer, whoever she is, she lied to me from the day we met. Our entire relationship is based on a false identity. She's not the person I thought I married. Our marriage license is fraudulent. I don't even know what that means legally, but I also understand that she was 17 years old, fleeing violence, trying to survive. I'm angry at the deception, but I also recognize she was a kid in an impossible situation who made choices to survive and who's been trapped in those choices ever since. I don't have answers yet about whether I can stay, but I'm still here, still supporting her through this, so that's something." Tyler said, "Mom, do we have family in Russia? Do we have grandparents or aunts or uncles or anyone?" Jessica shook her head and said, "I don't know, Tyler. I lost contact with everyone when I fled in 2004. My father is dead. My mother disappeared. I don't know if she's alive or dead. I had some cousins, but I don't know what happened to them. Part of me wants to find out, wants to reconnect with whatever family might still be there. But part of me is terrified because reconnecting with that world could put all of you in danger." The episode that eventually aired, months later, after extensive legal proceedings and with Jessica's explicit consent, became one of the most controversial programs in television history. The decision to air Jessica's confession sparked intense debates about journalistic responsibility, about whether the show should have stopped her from confessing to crimes, and about the ethics of broadcasting someone's immigration status and false identity to millions of people. Jessica was indeed contacted by federal authorities following the initial taping. However, her case became complex because she had entered the country as a minor fleeing violence, had built a stable life, had American citizen children, and was married to an American citizen. After extensive legal proceedings, negotiations with immigration attorneys, and significant media attention, Jessica was offered a settlement. She would plead guilty to reduced charges, pay substantial fines, but would be granted permission to apply for legal status under prosecutorial discretion given her circumstances of entry and the time elapsed. The process took nearly 2 years, during which Jessica lived in legal limbo, unable to work legally, under supervision, while her case wound through the system. Her marriage survived. David ultimately decided that while he was angry about the deception, he understood that Jessica had been a traumatized teenager making survival choices, and that the person she had become over 15 years was real, even if the identity documents were false. Jessica's children struggled with the revelation, but eventually came to understand and accept their mother's complicated history. Tyler, who was 18 by the time his mother's legal status was resolved, wrote an essay about the experience that said, "I grew up thinking my mom was a regular American woman named Jessica Monroe. Then I learned she was actually Jennifer Kozlov from Russia, living under a false identity to escape violence, and that everything about our family history I'd been told was a lie. At first, I felt betrayed and angry, but as I learned more about what she fled from and why she hid her past, I realized my mom was incredibly brave. She escaped violence as a teenager, built a completely new life in a foreign country, learned to be American so thoroughly that even her own kids didn't know she wasn't, and raised us to be good people without any of the violence or criminal connections from her past. That's not a criminal. That's a survivor who protected her children by hiding her trauma from them." The story of Jessica's confession sparked a national conversation about undocumented immigrants who came to the United States as children or teenagers fleeing violence, about the ethical complexities of identity fraud committed for survival, and about whether people who build stable, productive lives under false identities should face full criminal penalties when their circumstances of entry involved fleeing danger. 2.5 years after her confession, Jennifer Kozlov's, she had legally reclaimed her birth name while also keeping Monroe as a middle name to honor the identity she'd lived under, was granted permanent legal residency in the United States. She became an advocate for immigration reform, particularly for people fleeing organized crime violence, and spoke publicly about her experience of living under a false identity for 15 years. In interviews, she said, "I came to America at 17 with fake documents because staying in Russia meant death. I built a life as Jessica Monroe. I went to school, I worked hard, I married, I had children. I was a good citizen in every way except that I wasn't legally supposed to be here. For 15 years, I lived in fear of being discovered. Confessing on Family Feud was terrifying, but it was also liberating. I'd rather face legal consequences and live as my true self than continue hiding. My children now know who I really am." Jennifer Kozlov from Russia, who fled violence and rebuilt her life here. "And they're not ashamed of me. That's worth more than any false security that hiding provided." The story of Jennifer Kozlov's confession became a powerful testimony about identity, immigration, survival, and the complicated ethics of deception motivated by self-preservation. It challenged simple narratives about illegal immigrants. By showing a real person who seemed completely American, who had raised American children and contributed to American society, but who had built that life on a foundation of false documents created to escape violence. It forced uncomfortable conversations about whether identity fraud committed by a traumatized teenager fleeing organized crime should be treated the same as identity fraud committed for financial gain, and about what justice and mercy look like in immigration cases involving people who enter illegally as minors fleeing danger. But perhaps most significantly, Jennifer's confession became a reminder that many people living seemingly ordinary American lives are carrying extraordinary secrets about their pasts, their identities, and how they came to be here, and that the choice to finally tell the truth, even when the truth could destroy everything, is an act of courage born from exhaustion with hiding and a desire to be known authentically by the people who matter most. As Jennifer said in one of her final interviews about the experience, "I lived as Jessica Monroe for 15 years, and Jessica Monroe was a good person, a good mother, a good wife. But Jessica Monroe wasn't real. She was a construct, a protective shell I built around Jennifer Kozlov to keep us both safe. Confessing who I really was, risking arrest and deportation to tell my children the truth, was the scariest thing I've ever done. But it was also the most honest thing I've ever done. I'd rather be Jennifer Kozlov facing legal consequences than Jessica Monroe living in constant fear of discovery, and I'd rather my children know their real mother, with all her complications and trauma and survival story, than know a sanitized fiction. Truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable lies. I know that now, and I hope anyone else hiding behind false identities out of fear will consider whether the cost of hiding is higher than the cost of truth.